I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Danny Jenkins, CEO and founder of ThreatLocker, and Bradford Bleier, Cybersecurity Compliance Manager at ThreatLocker. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
Good morning and good afternoon, I guess already, and thank you for having us here today. Brad, thank you for joining me as well.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Again, as mentioned, I'm the compliance manager at ThreatLocker, and I'm regularly addressing questions on CMMC and specifically 800.171. I want to cover a little bit of ground on how this will apply or may apply and how our tool supports it. Some of the detail in that discussion will be with demonstrations that I'll hand off to Danny, but part of it has to do with just outlining parts of the 800.171 controls list and specifically focusing our discussion on endpoint-based zero trust. If you look at the DoD strategy on zero trust, a lot of it talks about network-based network defense mechanisms. One of the things we focus effectively at the endpoint and put a great deal of granularity around a number of controls and specific elements that are called out in CMMC. NIST 800.171 Rev.3 was published in its final form or final draft late last year, and there's general discussion that it may be approved as early as later this year, and when it will be effective or when the specific controls in Rev.3 will go into effect. There's some discussion about whether that'll be part of 2.0, CMMC 2.0, or whether that'll come a little bit later. In either case, one of the things we particularly focus on that is unique or that is new in Rev.3 is allow listing. And specifically, allow listing has been around a long time. It's part of a secure platform going back decades, but historically it's been challenging to administer on a larger scale and to still make it usable for standard platforms. So one of the things, I've pulled it up here. Wait, make sure it's shared.
I can see your screen now. I can see the allow listing slide.
Yeah. So effectively, this gets directly to strict allow listing and not just alternate between allow and blocking, and expressly setting policies and defining policies so that you understand what software is permitted and expressly set policies and document policies on the baseline of your systems to make sure that it is only allow listing. So in that light, I think this would be a good point to demonstrate some of the how allow listing can be effectively managed in ThreatLocker. Danny, how is this best implemented?
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to, if I can figure out which screen it is. There you go. So I want to talk the concept of allow listing first, because the idea of allow listing is that you only allow trusted programs to run on your machine. And it's not just executable files, but DLLs, script files, Java files, different types of files that may execute code and access your data. And the reason this is so important is two reasons. One is whenever you run code on your computer, whenever you run code in your environment, that code has access to all of the data that the user has access to. And the other reason it is important is malware, ransomware, cyber attacks are just software. They're just code, they're just programs, and they're often written in the same languages. And sometimes they use legitimate tools to achieve their result. So by using allow listing, what you do is you figure out what you need in your environment and you block everything else from running, including ransomware. Now, there's a few parts of this and there's a few challenges that in the past that have made it difficult for people to achieve. And the first one is figuring out what is in your environment. And that's the first thing that we do really, really well. And that is figure out what's there to begin with and creating an effective baseline of what is there, and then modifying that baseline to what it should be. And the way we do that essentially is we deploy an agent and we go into a learning mode and we learn what is in your environment. And while we're in that learning mode, or actually going forward as well, we log everything that's happening on your machine, every executable, every DLL, every program that's running. We log who it's signed by, when it was created, the hash, the certificate, other information about the program in a centralized audit. And this is really great for auditing purposes and other various compliance. But what we want to use it for is actually building that allow list, building the list of programs that are needed in your environment. So the second thing we do is we actually start to build out a list of programs. Now, if anyone's ever used an allow listing approach before, they'll realize what typically happens is it gives you a big list of DLL files and hashes and says, this is what we've baselined on your machine. And what we found is this wasn't very effective, because if you're an organization with thousands or hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of users, quite often those DLLs mean nothing for you. So what we do at ThreatLocker is we actually match every file with the appropriate application. Then we give you a simple list of applications that we found in your environment. We also give you research on the application. So in this case, I can see, for example, I've got 7-zip in my environment. I can see potential risks with the software. I can see tags. I can see what countries it was developed in. So I could go into here, for example, and say, okay, this program would be able to access all of these, would be able to access my files, the internet, the registry. It was made in Russia. I can see any CVEs or any risks associated with the program. So this allows me as the IT administrator, the security officer, to remove what might be a risk or limit it. So we can even say, hey, I don't want to remove this program, but I want to limit what it can access, because maybe I need 7-zip, but my company doesn't like software made in Russia for any reason. I could go into here and say, I want to limit it from accessing my files. I want to limit it from going out to the internet so it can't exfil my data. And that's a very simple change as well. Now, we can also filter by countries. We can filter by tool type. So if we wanted to go through and say, how do we see what maybe garbageware is on my machine? So I could go into here and say, show me all my shopping tools. And I can see here that I've got a shopping tool. I'm sure I've got one on here. I can see I've got Cooper running. Again, we can see all information about the program, where it was made. So I can see here that, hey, this has access to my passwords. It has access to the internet. And I can also see that it was made in China as well, which, again, is a factor we want to take into account when we're permitting or not permitting the software. So do I really want to save 20 cents on my shopping if the tool can see all of my passwords? So what we've achieved here essentially is we've given you a list of everything that's running. We can see which devices it's running on. And then after a learning period, we can do a simulation if we need to, and we can lock down the machine so nothing can run. So in this case, we switch it into secured and nothing runs. And once this machine's locked down, if somebody does try to run something they shouldn't be able to, it's going to get blocked. And I'll give you a demonstration of that, but I know you wanted to talk a bit change control a little bit as well, and we might hold on some of this demonstration. Brad, you're on mute if you're talking.
Pardon me, until we get to the change control. Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
How might you show evidence of the baseline once you do get to that stage?
So what we're essentially seeing here is, and that is a requirement, we're going to see the baseline. Now, quite often a baseline, like I said, looks like a list of files, but in our case, this is the evidence of the baseline. We can see a full audit. So if we want to go back and break down into details, we want to see where they are. All of those notes are kept. So if I was to go into any application, I can see every computer it was found on. So I can see on Cooper, I've got one computer in my demo org, but I can see it's applied to one computer. I can see the list. I can also go back and see a real detailed audit. So if I wanted to say, show me a detailed baseline from this machine of every, oh, sorry, I've got to go back further. I can do it by execute for now. Of everything that's happened, I can also see that, and that will show me how it got into the baseline and all of the details on it. But the most important thing is, this is our baseline. This is what's allowed in our environment. And then if we want to modify it, we can modify it here as well.
So is there some part of this where you could see like an inventory of all the devices that you're talking to or that we're controlling?
Yeah, so in this case, I can go into my, of course, my environment is one computer, one demo, so I have one device. But in a normal environment, we're going to see thousands or tens of thousands of machines in here. We can see the devices, and we can see, and that aligns with the application control to see which devices have which software. So again, demo environment, one device. A real environment looks a lot different. So typically you'd see how many devices this software is on. We can see how many policies does it apply in the organization and details across here.
So before we move on to the next stage, can you show anything about configuration control?
Yeah, so one of the things about config and configuration comes into two parts in my mind. There's general configuration is the configuration of the systems, but then there's also configuration of, in my mind, it needs to go beyond that of what applications can do. Because when you think about a normal operating system, the way those operating systems are created is pretty open. So when you allow software in Windows, everything is allowed to see everything, and it's pretty wide open once it's allowed. But what we do is we do two things. One is we have a configuration manager tool that allows you to create very refined configuration controls, but also enforce those controls and report on them if they're not enforced. And they could be any configuration you can think of. And we can do it at different levels. But we could, for example, say we have a configuration that ensures that the guest account is disabled. And in here we say, okay, we've got a configuration, the guest account must be disabled, and we can disable or enable this policy. And if it changes, it will actually log it in the unified audit and create a report out of that, so we can go off and see, was there any computers where the guest account wasn't disabled? It could be something as simple as configuring antivirus, setting minimum, maximum password age, password complexities, and things like that. So when I go in here and I say, here's my password complexity, I can enable or disable these policies as well to say that they have to meet certain complexities. And that's in one page, one place, and it's very nice. Again, this does two things. One is it enforces policy. So if a computer doesn't have a password policy or hasn't disabled the guest account, we can actually go and turn that setting on to enforce it. And there's hundreds of different policies here, like configuring RDP, configuring IPv6, whatever you can think about, configuring login messages, which is another requirement that systems must have a message saying that you're not allowed to do this. But also, so it's going to enforce that configuration, but it's also going to report. So in the event that something changes, which I don't have any changes on my machine, but I can go into here and I can literally see any configuration changes to see if somebody actually stepped out of the lane and it was corrected here as well.
So just a quick tangent. We got one question. Does ThreatLocker prevent child processes from legitimate applications? Either, I guess, on allow list. They didn't say, but both on allow listing and ring fencing.
So, and to clarify, so there's two parts to this. The first of all, even if you've got a permitted application, if a bad process if a process that isn't trusted using our allow list tries to run, it's not going to run. So if you were to take, for example, Kaseya, there was an incident in 2021 where there was a vulnerability. Kaseya was a trusted application. There was a vulnerability in it, and that trusted application tried to push out a piece of malware, and the malware was blocked because it's not on the allow list, even though, and it was unknown malware at the time, so it wasn't blocked by the EDR or the antivirus, but it was blocked by our allow listing. But the other thing is, we think about child processes of things that are permitted as well. So we were to take, for example, Microsoft Office. Maybe we have a policy for Office, and Office is permitted. And then we have a policy for PowerShell, and PowerShell is permitted because PowerShell at this point is an integral part of the Windows operating system. So I could go into Office here, and in the policy, we can say, first of all, it's not going to be allowed to run anything that's not on the allow list. But I can also say that it's also not allowed to run things that are on the allow list unless they're explicitly defined, or I can just explicitly deny certain allowed applications. So in the case of Office, out of the box, we will recommend policies for you. So we'll say, we do not recommend that Office can call PowerShell, can call run DLL, can call 4-file C script, because that's a very big attack vector for the bad guys. They like to create macros, vulnerabilities in Office, and call these applications. So we're able to allow child applications, but we're also able to deny them, which is probably more important. So it can't talk to other potential weapons on your devices.
Can you go into a little detail on how you set the policies on those, on the configuration manager?
Yeah,
And
so
maybe show a policy or two?
yeah, so I can create a couple of policies here, and configuration manager can really set any Windows configuration policy. And I've got a bunch already applied here, but I'm gonna add some in. So if I went, for example, set password protected screensaver. So in here, what I've done is I've enabled a policy to enforce, if I can scroll properly, my password protected screensaver. I've said I just want a blank screen. I've set the screensaver active. The screensaver is secure, which means it's going to be a password. And I'm going to go in here and say that within 10 minutes of anyone walking away from their desk, which seems to be, I'm going to type it because I can't type it, I have to drag it. Oh, there you go, I'll say 12 minutes. This policy is going to be enforced. And it's very simple. I hit create, although it seemed to jump up on me there. And it creates that policy for me. And now that is enforced across the entire organization. I could choose just to enforce it on some devices in the organization. So I could say, hey, I don't want this to apply to the entire organization. I only want it to apply to certain devices, which is very useful. I'll give another couple of examples here. So I'll use Windows Defender as an example. I mean, Windows Defender's built antivirus built into Windows. We want to make sure that it is configured and it's working. So I'm going to go into here. I'm going to configure the Defender policy. I've said I'm going to enable Windows Defender. I'm going to turn on real-time protection, and I can set protection options. So I can use basic, or disabled is the basic, or I can use more advanced options. And then I can go in, I can do things like automatically send samples, never send samples because we don't want our data going up to the internet, and any exclusions that I needed in my organization, I can also have in here, and then they're reported in one place as well. So there's another example of just a configuration being enforced, but also being monitored, because as soon as it's enforced, it is monitored if it's changed as well.
And I'm just going to briefly take control back for a moment.
Yeah.
On the share.
Okay.
So over to continuous monitoring, and this is a good segue based upon the use of the controls.
And you're not sharing just yet, Brad?
I'm not. There. Yes or no?
Yeah, there we go. I can see it now.
Okay, so on the continuous monitoring part, CMMC has hundreds of controls, and we're not obviously going to go through all of them today, but I'm focusing on those things or those aspects of implementing zero trust in CMMC or in 171. And particularly those that have to do with more detailed processes. And 3.12.3 talks about continuous monitoring. Conmon, or continuous monitoring, something that's increasingly being implemented by NIST, and effectively requiring all of the other different controls be monitored and assessed. So and this is a very short control, but basically it's saying implement a system level continuous monitoring strategy, and ThreatLocker allows you to do that. And then including ongoing monitoring and security assessments, effectively continuous and across an entire period of time, instead of just scanning once a month or scanning once a year for compliance, particularly having to do with system controls or your baseline. Continuous monitoring provides the requirement that you build a mechanism to make sure that that is effectively continuing. Now I'm going to push that back.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll share my
screen. You want to
yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about and there's a lot of things that we're continuously monitoring on the system, but I'll talk about some of the important ones. If I can, I really struggle to see which screen this is. Seems like that's it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so you can see my portal still where it says Configure Defender, Brad?
I can see it, yes.
Yeah, okay, because sorry, it's not putting the normal box around the screen. Okay, so there's a various areas of continuous monitoring. Obviously, the configuration manager and monitoring of those and reporting of those. And we're doing a few nice reports as well. We can also monitor out for indicators of compromise and changes in your system. So, and we've got a whole bunch of boxes out the box, policies out the box. And the nice thing about this is we actually add them into community, so you can go off and add them without actually knowing how to do them. So if I went into here and said, I need a policy that continuously monitors my event logs for being cleared, I could go in here and just add this policy straight away, and it will actually tell me it's going to monitor event log ID, it's going to monitor the Windows event log, it's going to create an alert, and I could just download that policy. I'll accept all the disclaimers, and now the policy is in my ThreatLocker Detect environment. So that will continuously monitor that. Now, there's a few different ways of monitoring. Obviously, we want summary monitoring. Hey, something changed. You got to acknowledge it. Something bad happened. But we also want backup detailed logs to back that up. So if something does happen, we say, well, what happened on the system preceding this? Who was logging in? Who was doing everything else? So we can see that as well. We've got full logs of every device and every machine. We have storage monitoring and storage control. So we can monitor all file access. We can monitor USB access. We can monitor file share access, change of files, delete of files, moves of files, upload. If somebody's essentially accessing a file and then on a website, we can see all of that details in here in one central place, which is really, really important. And we can see what websites they're on, whether they're accessing the files in the central log. Now, when we're dealing with the higher level alerts, because there's the detailed logs, and then there's the monitoring and the acknowledgement of those monitoring. So if something bad does happen or something breaks a policy, then we'll actually bring it into a response center for your compliance or for your SOC team to review. And I want to talk about, I'm going to use one as an example here, which is I'm just going to try and run this advanced IP scanner. Now, advanced IP scanner in our environment is not permitted. And because we're using ThreatLocker, we have this allow listing system, so it's actually not allowed to run. However, it is a breach of policy to run network scanning tools in our environment. And under our continuous monitoring, we have that policy in place to continuously monitor and ensure that is not happening. So because we've breached this will be included in a summary report as well. It's now said, hey, we've got an alert that someone is at least trying to break policy. But it was blocked, but they're trying to break policy. So we can see this alert and we can see everything about this alert. So we can see that the alert details, we can see the full Windows event log that triggered it. Now, at the same time, we can also see everything else that's happening on the system. So in the event that someone logged in, something else bad happened, we can see that pop up. We can see all installs. We can cross-reference everything with known virus databases, all network traffic, and everything else. Now, in the case of ThreatLocker, we actually have these policies also monitored by ThreatLocker SOC. So if you don't have your own SOC and you don't have your own environment, ThreatLocker will monitor it for you. In this case, they've actually sent a challenge to me to say, hey, if you're an IT person, you should authenticate yourself because you're trying to break our policy. And I haven't. And I'm going to answer this because it's actually going to be our SOC and they're going to shut down my machine if I don't. And just, hello, it's Danny.
This is Jose with ThreatLocker's MDR team. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. I just got an alert from your demo desktop for advanced IP scanner being executed. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of this and this is something you're okay with.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm just doing a demo for a customer, but thank you for the call. You can clear the alert.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. All right. So what's cool about this is when you're thinking about continuous monitoring, it means nothing unless someone is watching behind that continuous monitoring and then taking actions. So if you don't have your own SOC, your own environment to create those alerts, respond to those alerts, then it's not really continuous monitoring, it's continuous logging. So what ThreatLocker can do is we can give you the continuous monitoring where it can go to your SOC, but we can also send it to our own SOC. They can validate against policy and they can take actions. And those actions could be writing up a report. They could be calling a phone number and saying, hey, in this case, my actions are set to call a phone number. And they could be actually locking down or removing a device from the environment if it breaches policy, which is very, very powerful.
So how might we do that? Take one of the physical control, pardon me, the configuration controls, say the screen password or the password complexity. If somebody were to change or modify or break one of those policies, how would that look, and how could you use continuous monitoring to make sure that that got responded to?
So there's two parts to this. There's the first, how do I want to respond to it? And then how do I make sure it's being enforced? So we always like to start off with enforcement. It's not a requirement, but we like to start off with enforcement because it's okay going around slapping users on the hand all the time when they do bad things. but it's better to just make sure they can't do bad things, which is why we block software that's untrusted and why we put policies in place. So the configuration manager, we have the policy in place here that says, hey, this is disable, configure Windows Defender, virus protection, or set password. If someone was to go and turn off this password as an example, we could go into here and we can actually send an alert to monitor this. And we normally have these in our community as well. So we could say, if user turns off screensaver, notify SOC. So we could go in and we could create that alert. We can apply it to the entire organization. And essentially, we can apply this with any data, not just on ThreatLocker, but also on Windows event logs and other things. And we can use things like policy names. So I could go in here, I could put in the policy name, and I could say, hey, monitor this policy. If this triggers, then I want to create an alert. Now, we can do more than create alerts. We can actually restrict their access. We can isolate their machine. We can call APIs. We can send it to a SIM. We can send emails. We have a bunch of other options. So creating alert is obviously the nice way because it goes into one centralized place. We see all our alerts. And then at the end of the month, we can get a nice report that says, hey, these are the policies that were monitored. And now we're going to, and this is the action that was taken. So someone turns off the screensaver, no action needed. We turned it back on. And that's the better way of doing it, because what you don't want to do is say, okay, I have to go to the user's computer, turn on the screensaver, enroll them in training. Now I can just say, okay, I'm aware this is an information alert. So when I'm creating alerts, I can say, hey, I want alerts that I want to respond to, warnings or severe alerts. But I may also just want information alerts that go into my report to say, hey, if someone turns off the screensaver, I don't want our SOC to respond. I just want it in the report to know that it was turned off and it was turned back on by ThreatLocker. And that's part of the nice thing about this. We're continuously monitoring it. We're mediating it automatically where we can, and where we can't, we're alerting somebody in there.
And we could generate a report, each month that effectively documented that.
Yeah, so you can, and I'll give you an example of one report here, see if I can find one in my reports. And and what it does, it can tell you where things have changed, what alerts have happened, how they were responded to, did they need to be responded to. Where is this alert? If my brain is so here's an example. So we got reports here that these are all modular and we can create details on. But also if I go into here, this would be a report that gets emailed, and it will tell us where we're breaking policies, where we're in the red, where we're in the green. And what percentage of devices. We can also see extra information like of our applications, how many of them were made by country. So 22% of the applications on my machine, well, 22% of the foreign applications on my machine are from Russia, apparently. On my demo machine here, we can see high risk ones that have been prioritized.
So couple of quick questions from the audience. First, how could ThreatLocker assist with DLP or network access? Really two separate questions on that one.
So there's two areas. So first of all, we're a complete endpoint or host-based solution. We also monitor Office 365, the cloud, for configuration changes and things like that. But the primary area is the endpoint. On the endpoint, we can do two things. One is we are a host-based firewall, so we can control all traffic in and out of your endpoints, your servers, from one central place. But not only control, but also monitor. So all inbound and outbound traffic is monitored. But we can also create policies. So like in a workstation, a typical environment should now be, hey, I'm denying all traffic, and maybe I'm only allowing outbound web traffic. And we can create those firewalls in real time. But there's something else we can do, which is really quite revolutionary that nobody else is doing. We can do something called dynamic ACLs. The challenge with firewalls is they're based on IP addresses or groups of IP addresses, or maybe even countries, but they're ultimately based on an IP address. It comes down to. The problem is more and more companies need to publish services to their users. So we publish our CRM to our users, which is a web server, and we open up that port on the internet, and we have dual factor, and we allow our users to log into it. The challenge being, what I don't want is my users to go and breach policy by accessing that device, that portal, from a non-ThreatLocker device. So what we can do is we can actually create something called dynamic ACLs. And what dynamic ACLs allow you to do, and I've got an RDP example here. They allow you to, instead of adding individual IP addresses, which often change, because every time a user goes home, their IP address changes, they go into a different location. Even when I come in the office, I can actually set objects and groups of objects. And what it will do is it will create that ACL and open up the port as needed. So even if there was a vulnerability, an attacker couldn't see that port on the internet. And that's very effective at controlling your network traffic. And the same applies to storage. So we can control, and DLP is not just one thing. So people often think about DLP, or do you block USB drives, or are you encrypting files on the that's on our network, and if they get copied, they can't be used. And we have a bunch of policies to do all kinds of things like that. And we can go in and we can block USB drives, we can block unencrypted USB drives. But our DLP also applies to all file structures on the system. So our storage control. And we can also set risk algorithms that alert and automatically shut them down. So in this case, I've got a very simple policy saying, hey, I want to read and write access to the USB drive is denied. And if it is denied, the user is going to get a pop-up and they're going to be able to request that. And then the administrator can either approve it or not approve it. The other thing that's really useful is we can actually set thresholds and limits, because maybe, and we were talking about this before, but you need to allow your IT or your finance guy to access all of your finance files, for example. But you don't want him to be able to upload them all to the internet. He needs to be able to email 1 or 2 spreadsheets, but I need to know if they're exfilling data. So with our, and here's an example policy that's published in the community, for example. So I've got a thing here that says, hey, if somebody accesses more than 20 files from any of these web browsers, then I want to create an alert. And not only do I want to create an alert, I can set other automatic actions. So I can say, I want to create an alert, and then I don't want to wait for someone to actually respond to the alert, because I'm going to enable a storage policy to block all reads for that user. And now this user will not be able to read the files anymore. So until someone's replied to that alert, rather than saying, hey, someone got an alert, if they don't like what the user's doing, they're going to shut them down, we can say, someone got an alert and we've shut them down waiting for you to review it, because we think this is too big a threat to allow someone to do that. And then we could also take into account things like, what websites are they on? Are they on Dropbox? Are they on Chrome? Are they on Box.net or OneDrive? Could they be exfilling data through external storage, and use that in our calculation? But this is a very powerful way of not only controlling data access, but also responding to anomalies in data access.
The other question I think will be fairly short. Would the ThreatLocker agent still run offline on the workstation if not connected to the internet?
Yeah, so ThreatLocker is a completely local agent that it does talk to the internet or to GovCloud or whatever instance you're on to get data from it. And when it does that, it pulls its policies down and it keeps them on the local disk. So if the computer's offline, it will continue to run with all of its policies. Its policies will continue to be enforced. And if there is an attempted breach and it can't talk out to the internet or to the instance, it will just queue that alert until it does get an internet connection. If you do end up with a situation where you need to override, there's temporary override keys that are generated every day that you can use to get onto the machine. If you say you need to install a network driver and that's not in your permitted list to be able to get onto the internet. So there's a lot of override options there. Was there anything else?
Yeah, now let me just take control briefly and cover the last. Does it show? Any?
Yes, I can see it, yeah.
Okay, so this last bit, and it really goes into implementing additional process in support of compliance as well as security, is selection of and deviation from a baseline configuration. We've already talked extensively about the baseline and framing the baseline in terms of ThreatLocker to make it both practical and accurate, and effectively documenting all of those policies and being able to lay them out or report on them as necessary to show compliance to CMMC. But specifically, looking at identifying, documenting, and approving any deviations from established configuration settings. That is, practically, sometimes you need to allow deviations, and you need to find a way to do that efficiently and least privilege, so as short a period as possible, or as necessary. And then extending that through monitoring of change control effectively, that all of this needs to be watched, and more importantly, that you need to document the approval and disapproval of such changes with explicit consideration for security impact and monitor effectively all of those activities associated with configuration control changes. Interestingly, all of this is outlined nicely in 4 points is something that we do native. So let me push that back to Danny.
Yeah, and I think, let me share my screen here. So share again. Zoom just wants to kill me today on it, keeps changing the order of screens. Okay, so I think noting changes, who were they approved by, and there's various different levels we can do. We can even do multi-level approvals where they have to go to different departments, but I'll start off with just a normal request from a user. And this is going to touch on some other controls as well. So when a user does want new software or wants to make a change, they're going to get this option, say, hey, you're requesting a change. Now, if you're using ServiceNow, you've got ticketing systems, this will all integrate into those ticketing systems, and we can run workflows through those as well. Now, when the user is requesting the software, so in this case, it will say what was blocked. It will tell the user what this program would be able to access if it was running in your environment. It will also tell the user what countries the software was developed in, and they can put reasons they want the change. So I could say, I need, oh, I got my caps lock on. I need PuTTY to configure a Dell switch, which is obviously not what a user would say, but as an IT guy, maybe that's why I need PuTTY. So I can go in here and I can send a request to the response center. Now, if the user, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. If the user, if you were using a ticketing system, this could go into your ticketing system, but in our case, it's going straight into our response center. The administrator now has to approve the change. So you've got a user saying why they need it. You've got an administrator saying why they're going to approve it. So they can go in here and they can see all the details of this request. And they can also see why the user wants it. They can see who it's signed by. They can see if ThreatLocker matches it and knows what it is. So we already know what this application is. We validated it's in line with that proper application, and they can go and approve that. And when they approve that, they can actually file the ticket details here to say, hey, this is my ticket number. I'm going to enforce this. This is where it was enforced. If this was through ServiceNow or ticketing system, it would do that for you automatically. And we can choose who we're going to approve it for, a single computer or group, whether we're going to ring fence it, restrict it. So if you notice, it said, hey, if you run this program, it's going to be able to access your files, the internet, and other things. So maybe I'm going to go into here and say, I don't want it to access the internet. I don't want it to change my registry. I don't want it to access PowerShell. Or I can just use ThreatLocker's suggested ring fencing policy as well. And when I approve this, I can put all my details in. So I've got the thing here. So I can say ticket, I'll just put a random number in there. This is approved for IT persons. And I can just go off and approve that request. Now, all of these changes are logged in one place. So they'll be out on your reports. It's a change request. We can see what happened. We can see if it's temporary. We can see all of the alerts. And once it's approved, the user will get their update, and you can see how fast that was to approve the software as well. So users aren't sitting there waiting for new software to run. And the same applies with any of the other threats. So we dealt with that other threat when they're cleared, when they're resolved, all of them are put in to a central location. So, and when you get your monthly report, you'll be able to see those changes. You'll be able to see what happened, and someone will be able to validate that you follow the correct process on that.
And the documented reason or request and the administrator's answer are also logged. So all of that.
Yeah, everything is logged in here, the reason, the ticket. And if you've got a ticketing system as well, it will also put them in there or mark them as completed in your ticketing system. But in this case, we can see everything. I'm going to in here, the ticketing details, why it was approved, any descriptions. And these are all customizable fields as well.
And that's against any policy, not just executable. It would also be for other things as well.
Oh yeah, so storage requests, changes to elevation requests. So I need software to run as an administrator. All of that is logged in one place. And it will also come in the report.
A couple more questions from the audience. Is limiting end users without admin rights good enough? Which I think is an invitation to talk about escalation or elevation.
Yeah, so one of the features ThreatLocker has, first of all, is the ability to take away admin rights and allow certain programs to run as a local admin, because a lot of companies are struggling with this idea of taking away administrative rights, because when you take away administrative rights, certain programs need to run as an admin. And then also, say a user needs to install a printer, they now have this big process where the IT guy has to log onto that machine. The bottom line is, first of all, we did a whole webinar on this actually. Ransomware does not need to be a local admin to run. So taking away admin rights is going to do not, and there's this compliance need. And from a compliance point of view, the answer is no too, but there's also a security point of view. Ransomware does not need to be an admin, period, to run. So taking away admin permissions isn't going to do that. Now, you should take away admin permissions, and that's one of the things we can actually enforce as well, where we can, one is we can allow certain programs to run as an admin. We can do temporary elevation requests. So it's a full PAM tool. So if I try to run something as an admin here, and I'm not an admin, I can request elevation from an admin point of view as well, go into my response center, and I can see that. I can see that somebody's trying to elevate, well, Windows Terminal in this case, and that's very important. I can allow certain programs to run through the elevation, but I can also go in and take away local admin accounts, automatically remove them, and automatically remove the approval on them. So I can do it two ways. One is I can say remove all local admin accounts, except the only local admins allowed on the machines are Bob, or I can do it the other way where it says just remove selected local admin accounts. So I can filter those requests out.
And here's a longer question. ThreatLocker detect alerts needs a feature to add specific alerts. Example, we want to alert for local or remote interactive administrator logons. We can set that alert up, but cannot specify to alert only on logon type 2 and 10. So we get tons of administrator logins for everything. Is this feature something that could be added or is going to be added?
So I think you can, and I need to check this. So I'm pretty sure the way that it works is the login type is in the event log description. Because, and if I'm wrong, we'll definitely add the feature. So please reach out afterwards. But it's basically in the event type description. What you can do is you would set up a policy, and I don't know the event log ID for administrator logins, but let's just say logins. I can look this up afterwards, and let's say the event log ID is, let's just say for argument's sake, it's 5654. We'd add that condition, and then we can actually filter by the event log type. Sorry, in the description, event log description. I'm pretty sure for the administrators, it's in here. If I'm wrong, Paul, I apologize, and please reach out because we will actually get it as a feature. But you can essentially say, as long as it contains, and I haven't seen this particular one, but I know other ones, they'll be like login type 2. And you could say, I'm going to put that in there. And if you want to add multiple, what you do is you put them in the any condition here for that. The next oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I thought it was the next part of the question, but it's a different question.
So next question, how long are the audit logs retained?
So by default, depending on which product you have, but the standard is 30 days. You can retain them. ThreatLocker Unified gives you a standard of 90 days if you're using ThreatLocker Unified, but we actually have options to upgrade them. Well, technically we can upgrade them as long as you want, but I've never had anyone ask for more than 7 years. So it costs more depending on how long you want to keep them and how much detail you want to keep. That is for the detailed audit logs. But the response center logs are kept for, I don't even know if we delete them ever, but let's just say we guarantee we keep them for 7 years because that seems to be the number, but I don't think we even delete them at all. So any change requests, any responses to changes, they are not deleted. And I'll have to check our documentation, but it might say that we guarantee 7 years, but I think it's actually indefinite or until you request them to be removed.
Next one, can you restrict an app for a limited period of time? Say they need it to configure a switch and it will be for 2 hours.
Yeah, so in this case, and I'll show you something else you can do at the same time, actually. When we permit apps, we have a few other options that are useful. One is if we don't know what the app is, we can actually, this comes down to another requirement of testing in a separate environment, any new software that's added. I'm not sure the exact NIST requirement, but I know it's in there somewhere. We actually have a separate testing environment as well. So when you do want to test an app that you don't know what is or you haven't validated, ThreatLocker will recommend that you spin it up in our testing environment. This is an isolated machine on the internet, completely separate from your environment. What's cool about it is the software we downloaded to it. We get this traffic light system to tell you anything suspicious about it. It's everything it's doing. And if you double click on it, it will, in this case, we see this isn't, it says it's Google Update. It's not Google Update. So we can see it's bad. If we did want to permit this, which I don't because it's actually bad, it's changing. I've got bait files on here. It's telling me the system changes, and it also dumped some test viruses on my system. So I definitely don't want to permit it. But if I did want to permit it, I'd hit end and capture. In this case, I'm not going to end and capture, but I could actually go in and set a certain amount of time. And I can do it two ways. I can do it here. So here's your to answer. I can say, hey, I want to allow this for 2 hours. I could also be more granular in other areas. So I could say, hey, I want to allow it permanently, but I know the user is going to need to install this. So I'll need them to elevate it for 1 hour. So they can get through the installation process and then the elevation goes away. In addition to that, you can also get much more granular in the policies. So if I was to go into my 7-zip policy, for example, here, I could say, well, I don't like the fact that 7-zip's on my machine. It could be used to encrypt files. So I've ring-fenced it. I've told it can't change the registry. I've said it can't go out to the internet. But also, I want to only allow it to run. I can set a policy, but I can also set an expiration, but I could also set times of day. So I can say this can only run in the day from 9 a.m. for 30 minutes, say, for argument's sake. I could type, oh, need to get this numlock is struggling on my virtual machine. So I could say, it does not want me to type 9. Do I have to pick a time here? Oh, there you go. It has to be like that. So 12:49, I can go down, I guess. So I can go to 9. So the user can only run it. I'm not a big from 9:30, and they're only allowed to use it from 9:30 to 10. So if it goes after that, it's going to shut down the app. So this is useful when you have certain weekly tasks that you don't want done, but maybe your IT guy does a scan of your network every week, but you don't want him to be able to scan the network the rest of the time. You could set policies around that as well. Okay.
You mentioned a little bit on the network. Can you go into a little more detail on what network controls are at the endpoint and how that works?
So I think essentially there's 2 things to the network control. The first one is we log everything that's happening on the network. And I cannot stress how important this is. And I would say, because we run an MDR 24/7, and I would say probably 40% of true indicators of compromise we detect at the network level. And that could be somebody's opened up port 3389, they've got an RD gateway open, someone's on the internal network, there's PowerShells reaching out to something suspicious on the internet. So the first thing we do is we log all that data, and we also cross-reference it with known threats. So we could say, for example, hey, your device is talking to, I'm going to go to my cleared or resolved. My demo device is talking to, I don't know if we've got any malicious network on here, but I'll check the following potentially malicious sources. It'll give you the IP address. It'll tell you what policy it hit and all of the details. And it's just cross-referencing this with known databases. So this isn't actually malicious, but a few of the databases say it is malicious. So this is a nice feature, really, really useful. The next thing we do with this is we're also able to set those policies. So both on ring fencing, but also on network controls, where we can go in here and we could, where is my network control? We can do anything from permitting remote desktop to denying remote desktop, stopping east-west movement. In our servers, we can set up policies like only allow file sharing from certain ports. So here I've got a policy that says my file sharing ports are allowed. But again, dynamic ACL. So if someone comes into my office, plugs in a laptop, they're not going to be able to see this. They're not going to be able to see my server. If they do a port scan, it will say all of those ports are closed.
Okay, well, I think we've worked our way through the 3 major categories in 800.171 that I was trying to touch on. Are there any other parts of the platform that people would like questions answered on?
And I think I've got one question here. Is ThreatLocker compatible with Linux and Mac OS? The ThreatLocker is fully compatible with Mac OS. We have our Linux version in like a pre-beta build at the moment, and it's due to go out within the next, well, hopefully not weeks, but it's imminent anyway, depending on how well all the testing goes. Okay. I think
Is ThreatLocker compatible with Chromebooks?
ThreatLocker is not compatible with Chromebooks. However, we do monitor Chrome extensions and browser extensions on Windows, and we are adding ARM processors on the new Surface Books that they're just releasing as well. So that's a new one that's about to come out. But yes, they are. It's not, unfortunately, Chromebooks are kind of closed operating systems, so it's hard to install things on them. Okay.
Okay. Well, I think we're concluded then. If you could answer the questions that they've posed, I think let me go ahead and.
I just marked them as answers because we've been going through them. A couple of things to say, guys. The ThreatLocker is a really powerful platform. We've shown you some of the stuff today. So we've talked about our ring fence and our application control, but we really haven't gone into detail. If you want to find out full detail on how it works, whether you're just looking for allow listing or a PAM solution, or whether you're looking for a complete endpoint defense system, reach out to us, do a demo. You can see the QR code. You can go to threatlocker.com or contact your Carahsoft rep. The other thing that's worth noting, we do have a series of webinars. Some of them are really cool and really fun that we do about once a month. And we do everything from we strapped a pineapple onto a drone and flew outside my office window and managed to de-off the Wi-Fi and steal some creds like that. We use rubber duckies, OMG cables. We do Metasploit demonstrations, and then we do demos of ThreatLocker and other detail stuff as well. They're really cool webinars. So if you do subscribe to them, you can go on our YouTube channel and see them. There was one actually where we took control of a Mac, put malware on it, uploaded all the files, just intercepting the connections between the AirPod and the Mac. So they're great educational webinars. Feel free to join them. We do them once a month. Also, every year we host a conference in Orlando, Florida in February, Zero Trust World. And what we do there is we're really there to educate you about Zero Trust, educate the importance of Zero Trust, and show you how to deploy Zero Trust solutions. But also we have some really good other educational labs, like how to harden Windows Server, how to secure Macs, how to secure Office 365. And then we have hands-on hacking labs where you come in, you get in front of our laptops, rubber duckies, and we walk you through, let's do this. Let's create this script. Let's plug this in. Let's see how we steal data. So, and how attackers are actually using it. So it's a great few days in Orlando, Florida. So check that out on our website as well. And I think I just want to say thank you for our hosts. I appreciate you guys inviting us.